I'm ready. I'm ready too.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for coming today. Reminder that we don't have any water in this building. So I would tell you not to drink the water, but we don't have any anymore. So today our speaker is Dr. Nicole Bernsen. She's the director of rugby and the head women's rugby coach here at AU. Before joining us here, she was the associate director of athletic services at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. She's worked in the rugby world for over a decade in a number of roles, both playing and administrating. And woven through her rugby experiences are a number of academic accomplishments. So Dr. Bernsen earned her BA in Global Studies from UC Santa Barbara, an MA in Political Science from the University of New Mexico, and a PhD in Forest Resource Policy and Economics from the University of Maine. So Dr. Bernsen, take it away.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, is this one we good? Okay, cool. Thanks everybody for making the time to come out today. You might be wondering why athletics is co-sponsoring an environmental studies talk and why the rugby coach is here. So I'm here just to talk a bit about my research when I was at the University of Maine. So I've had a interesting career path, but woven through it has always been education, from being a high school teacher to going to grad school and now coaching. So I take that education approach. So excited to be here and share some of this with you. So the project that I'm going to talk about is called the Rural Youth Futures Project, and it was a pretty broad interdisciplinary community-focused project that had stakeholders in both Oregon and Maine. We worked with some universities as well as some cooperative extensions, nonprofits, and community resource groups. I'd also like to shout out my undergrad research assistants who helped me with the project. We had a business student who helped market our survey, and an environmental science student who helped with the data analysis for our community fact sheets, which I'll wrap up on. Why do we want to talk about rural communities and schools? Well, certainly here in Alfred, we're in a rural place, and while this research is in New York, a lot of what we learned is transferable to many places in here. So I hope you all will find something relevant out of today's talk. Nearly a quarter in the United States go to school and live in rural places, and over half of our school districts in the US are located in rural communities. Those communities oftentimes have limited educational and occupational opportunities for folks who live there. They have higher rates of poverty, and students are homes with parents that have lower educational attainment than the rest of the nation. These areas often struggle to retain effective teachers and leaders for our rural youth, and so we have continued to see a declining population in rural places. However, schools are an awesome place in rural communities, and they're often the epicenter of local activity, much like AU is a big epicenter here in Alfred and the surrounding areas. Try to stay awake for this part. It's pretty quick. It's the theory. So looking at Aspirations theory, we're looking at two components, achievement and social comparison. So achievement theory looks at our motivation to set and achieve goals. We acquire traits that are formed at an early age that remain constant over time. However, they are susceptible to intervention. So what that means is we could potentially impact students' desire to achieve in a positive manner. With looking at theory, when we're in groups, we have pressure towards uniformity. We have that present at a stronger rate when these groups are in isolation, such as rural communities. And groups tend to anchor towards the mean or the middle, fear of ostracism or being alienated from the group that is so central to their isolated existence. However, again, potential positives are that we could combat these negative tendencies towards uniformity, encourage more outliers, or perhaps change what the focus of that uniformity is. We could encourage risk-taking, diversity and equity. When we're talking about youth aspirations, how we're defining it is inspiration in the present and ambition for the future. So being inspired and actually wanting to work towards something. So, wanting to be in the NBA is not necessarily an aspiration if you're not doing anything to get there. And aspirations are really important predictors of attainment. Can't measure attainment until it's already happened, so that's pretty hard to measure with young people who are still in school. All right, so the conceptual model that I came up with, hopefully it makes sense to you all as well. So we have our rural youth person, we have a person in the middle that is developing their aspirations in the cloud. So they're not fully formed, they're thinking about what they want to be in the future, where they want to work, where they want to live, what do they want to do with their lives, what kind of relationships do they want to have. We have a ton of influences impacting us, impacting them day to day, the economy, where we go to school, what we study, our family, our community, and the society we live in. So placing this in resource communities, we're looking at the economic influence of those resources, which I'll talk about in a bit, but that's how the environmental piece kind of fits in there. All right, I'll hit this one quick. So the statistical analysis we used are up there to help us assess our objectives. So we're looking at variation in educational aspirations among youth. What are they influenced by? What are the barriers that youth are encountering when trying to engage in school in their community? What's preventing youth from realizing their aspirations? And what are their residential aspirations? So there's kind of two main areas I was looking at: educational aspirations, how far do they want to go in school? And then residential aspirations, do they want to stay in their rural communities or move and leave to a city or to another place? So we utilize the community capitals framework by Flora and Flora, which essentially says that communities are made up of different capitals. And some are stronger than others, but if you have all of them, you can have a healthy community. So we developed steering committees for this project that were comprised of community members from each of the capitals. So we had folks, from a bank, from human development, from all different areas, from not just the school, but definitely the school as well. And we generated a survey that would serve our research purposes as well as their community interests. So we worked with 2 community development organizations as well. So we wanted to have the community-based participatory research as part of our project. I think oftentimes we get stuck in academic journals and we have these ideas of what would be a really good research project and what we think the community needs, but oftentimes it's really important to just go talk to the community and see what they think that they need. So we tried to do that with this project and meet in the middle. So if you can imagine that cloud model that I was just showing, here's how we operationalized it. So when we put it into the survey, we need to find ways to measure all those things that we're talking about. So we put in questions to get at some of these things that are challenging to measure. There are lots of questions in the survey, important to the community members, and then a few of them we used for the statistical analysis, but lots of good information we gathered here. All right, where did we deploy the survey? So we looked and we found 2 communities that were similar in that they were resource dependent, primarily on timber, but in particular in Oregon, they also had a fishery industry as well that they relied on heavily. We looked at places that had a lot of public or conserved land. So being from the West Coast, I'm used to public land. Here, maybe more of you are used to conserved land. So a lot of the land has been taken up people put them in conservation easements and allow people to recreate on them while they still maintain ownership. But you can see there's lots of green there and lots of outdoor activity. Here are a few shots. You can see the left picture there. Jackman is pretty close to the border, and Frederick's home area. He's not here today. Some beautiful places, much like here in the southern tier as well. Just in looking at, census data, we can see their income of the two areas, percentages in poverty, percentages forested in comparison to the US. So trying to find two places that are on opposite sides of the country, but have a lot in common so we can talk about the youth as a group and separately and their experiences. All right, the dependent variables, the things that we're measuring in the study are, as I mentioned at the top, educational aspirations. So we asked students how far do they want to go in school, meaning do they want to end with a high school degree, go to a community college, bachelor's, master's, PhD, or doctorate, or medical school. We then transform that into years of schooling. So if they want to get a 2-year degree, that 14 years of schooling, bachelor's 16. So we turn that into a continuous variable. For residential aspiration, we ask them where do they want to live in 30 years, when they're 30 years old. And that had a few options, in my hometown, in my state, other rural place, in a city, in the US, outside of the US. And then we turned that into a rural place, which would be their rural place in their state or rural place in another state. And then all the other places were together. So if you saw on the analysis slide, that's how we ran the binomial logistic regression. The other variables here are listed out. We have pretty standard control variables. In the first model, we don't have the two italicized, educational aspiration and place attachment. So when we're looking at educational aspiration, we don't have educational aspiration because that's the dependent variable. And then when we look at residential aspiration, where do you want to live, it makes sense that how far you want to go in school might be impacted. So that model, and then your attached place, how attached you are to the place you live would likely impact if you want to stay there. Here are some of our students taking the survey. Out in Jackman, they have a really awesome food production there at their school. So it's a very isolated community. Most of the jobs are forestry jobs or folks that work for the customs and enforcement at the Canadian border. Oftentimes they get really great teachers who are married to someone that works at the border, and then that person gets moved to a different border location, and then they have to find a new teacher. But they grow a ton of food in their garden, and their whole dining hall is food that they've grown. They make all tomato sauce that they have all summer, and there's some stuff that they're growing. We had over 2,000 respondents, 70% Oregon, 30 were in Maine. You can see the gender breakdown there, and we surveyed high school students as well as middle school students. There are more respondents from Oregon because there were more schools and more people in Coos County than Scappoose County. What did we find? The education across the whole, the mean educational aspiration across the whole survey was 16.4 years. So average of a bachelor's degree or higher for all students. High percentages planning to go to post-secondary school of any kind of schooling after high school, and then 2/3 looking for bachelor's degrees. Pretty consistent there across the high school versus middle school, and then Oregon versus Maine. So in terms of those variables I was talking about that we were measuring, community perception these were all significant. So community really had a negative impact on educational aspirations. So if you really liked your community a lot, you had high perception of community, you were less likely to want to go to college. Can anybody think why that might be? Yeah, Becca. Sorry. Okay, lack of mentoring, Becca. Definitely. So in these communities, they don't have a lot of post-secondary options. So going to college means that they have to leave their community. They can't stay in this community that they really love and enjoy and their educational aspirations. Okay, school perceptions are positive. So high school perceptions lead to high educational opportunities. If you like being at school and people support fun, you probably want to keep going to school. Engagement activities, that was continuous variable. So for hours, the more engagement you have leads to high. Just do one activity, it might bump you up a little bit, but if you're involved in many things, your aspiration is higher. Higher grades, pretty. And girls reported higher aspirations than. All right, barriers that they were facing in terms of being in the school or community. Interested, don't have time. Transportation is a huge not enough activities, or maybe not the activity they want, can't afford it, or let them. Barriers to achieving those educational aspirations post high school. Top were cost, grades, not feeling they're smart enough, needing to work after high school is definitely tied into costs. And then that moving away, we talked about a bit there. Pleasantly, my parents don't want me to go far in school was the lowest, so that was encouraging. Okay, the residential aspirations, again, do they want to stay in their local resource-rich communities when they're, or live in those communities when they're 30, or do they see themselves living in a city or another country or another state? Not surprising, community perceptions are positive. So if they like their community, they have connections, they want to be in a rural place. School perceptions were negative. So if you have high school perceptions of your school, as we talked about in the last findings, you would be more likely to want to go to college, you would need to leave your community, and you might be less likely to live in a rural place later. That place attachment is a scale of a number of different questions that measure how attached you are to your community. So if you have a higher attachment, definitely more likely to want to live in a rural place. And then looking at state, students in Maine were more likely to want to live in a rural place than students in Oregon. I suspect that is because there is a much tighter rural-urban connection with people flowing back to urban places more frequently. And here's been to Maine, but it can be pretty isolating. But those communities are pretty isolated. Okay, so on to information, as I was saying, for some of our stakeholders that they could hopefully, use and put to work as to develop their communities. We asked students what they thought were important problems in their community, and you can see some of them overlapping, and then kind of some big differences there. So for example, homelessness is among the top in Oregon, it's the bottom in Maine. I think climate also could be part of that, and there are more large cities in Oregon. We have drug and alcohol abuse among the top, not enough things to do in town, very important to young people and probably most people, not having enough money, and not enough jobs. So the youth in those communities are attuned to what's happening in the economies that, again, are reliant on natural resource industries. Do any work with young people? You get lots of fun answers when you ask them open survey questions. Also really thoughtful answers. So they like least are located or described here. You can see some of those social theories I talked about, you know, folks feeling like they need to center around and then maybe not having things that other communities have or that cities might have. What they like best is also very strong. A lot of students really love being in these rural places. They love everything. They love the people, the recreation. Wouldn't want to live anywhere else. So our community partners, as I mentioned, had a lot of areas that they were really interested in finding out because they wanted to do programming and basically look and find where they need to put their dollars. So they're looking for rural development grants and for just general community and economic development. So one of the things that I would say I was probably most proud of is that we made these 4-page community fact sheets for every single school, well, every single town and county that we worked in. So these were meant to be like printed on an 11 by 17, folded in half. So there were, I think, 15 or 17 of these we made, and they covered, might go away? Nope. They cover different areas that we felt would be relevant to the communities and what they have. Their barriers to education, the top education. So we have activities that the students engage in so they can see what is already popular among students, where to invest, and then also maybe what's missing and opportunities for development. Training needs, definitely workforce training, and then just general community results in that bottom left corner. They had their top 5 wishes of what they would have in their communities. A lot of indoor recreation came up for the winter for sure. And then lots of was the top one as well. I think we can be optimistic about our results, and especially with such a large percentage of our country being in rural places, or I should say a large geographical percentage of our country is rural. So definitely engagement with the outdoors, very high, something they want to do, something they really love and enjoy. And we know that research on that shows it's good for our physical and mental health. They like their community. As someone who is from a small town that I thought was a rural town until I started studying rural towns, just from a small town, they like their communities. And so I think people that live in cities probably have a bias towards rural communities and feel that maybe all students in rural trying to, and that's not necessarily the case. We can definitely help with barriers. Financial literacy is huge. Navigating the process to go to college, to fill out FAFSA, to attain those aspirations. Demystifying college through college visits, outreach, extension, creating community connections. At AU, we definitely could extend out into other, and then just general skill development in terms of academics, social, etc. And then training programs we can help with are hands-on skills. So I think I've thrown out the word college a lot, but I don't necessarily mean that everyone needs to go to college. Lots of workforce training programs that are needed. And so developing those skills, advising, working on imposter syndrome in the workforce and academically, and then helping with job applications and interviews. And again, these things are transferable to many, just rural youth. So with that, and I kept it brief, but at least we have time for questions. So thank you for listening. Thank you to the department for inviting me, to athletics for helping co-sponsor this event, and to my husband for making us lots of delicious bread. So yes. And this is a photo from Piscataquis County, Maine, but could be a photo from around here.
Hi, I just had a question. Throughout your research, what was like the biggest surprise you found in it that kind of like surprised you the most, I guess, out of the results?
A couple things. I think, I mean, the main thing I talked about a bit at the end was how much folks wanted to stay in their rural communities and how much they loved them. I didn't get too deep into it, but the forest products industry has been hit really hard. And so there are tons of mills that have closed, and there's really a huge decline in employment opportunities. And so it's interesting how strongly students want to stay in their communities, even though there aren't enough opportunities to support the population that's there. So yeah, and just how innovative a lot of these schools are is really fun, like seeing what they do. Well, I didn't talk about it, but I had a whole listening section that totally failed, and I ran the survey once before and it also totally failed. So, when you're surveying youth, it's really hard to get things approved, which is good. And so when we ran the survey the first time, we had to have parent permission. So it was an opt-in situation. And so our response rate was so low, we got hardly any responses and the data was useless. And then we did some listening sessions with youth, which the people who came were super engaging, but they were really, really slow turnout numbers. So that was disappointing. And then we were able to submit our survey and show that we weren't asking anything personal or anything that would cause harm or any like no in-depth information at all, and everything was optional and all the schools were on board. So then we got permission to have the survey be an opt-out. So people who didn't want to take the survey didn't have to, but they didn't need parent permission. So that made it a lot better.
My question is about you're talking about forestry and jobs in small communities. What is the correlation between students who attend college or higher education, whether that's trade or anything like that, and local economies? And then also related to that, like how do people's mindsets about shared land and shared resources play into the like community's idea of the close-knit sense?
Well, I'm not exactly sure on the correlation on your first part. I think on your first question, I think that shared sense of land is really strong. And so in these small communities, they know everybody knows everybody. And so they have those kind of conserved areas that are open to everybody, so to speak, but the people that live there, know where to go, and they hunt, they fish, they trap. There's a lot of trapping in Maine. So they do that together. And I think that does, like, that type of land use bolsters the connection. I don't have a good answer for your first question.
So could you just remind me, is your Oregon town, is it in the eastern or the western part of
It
Oregon?
is on the west coast.
Okay, so it's green. It's the
Yeah,
the rainy part
It's
of
the green
Oregon.
part.
Yeah.
Rainy.
So both of these places I think of outside as being sort of nice. It's recreating is fun because it's pretty, there's stuff to do. Do you have an idea or could you speculate about how this might be different if you were in rural Utah or Nevada, for example? Maybe not
Maybe
Utah,
not
but
Utah.
yeah, not Utah, but you know what I mean? Like a
Yeah.
place that's not quite so it's not necessarily clear what you would do unless you have like an ATV or a mountain bike or something like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I will say the areas, they have 4 seasons, so that is definitely lends itself, as you said, to recreation. There are some certainly not great times of year to be outside, but I guess, I mean, it's different now with relation to internet availability and broadband, because I would say before that, even if you weren't in what we would maybe consider as natural beauty and recreation, I mean, if you're a kid, or at least like kind of how I grew up, if you live in a rural place in a small town and there's not much to do because you don't have a lot of stores and you don't have movie theaters, you're going to go outside and play and find stuff to do. It might not be, like hiking the AT or the PCT, but you're going to go run in the fields or play on the hills or do something with your friends. I think that's probably changed now with internet and just kids being on social media and on their phones and on their iPads now. So that's a good question.
Any more questions? Okay. Well, with that, big thank you. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.